I'm John Wilson, I'm the CEO at Agenta. We're a technology company that focuses on education and learning. We build, manage and operate platforms for education, for video collaboration. Externally, we prefer to work with what we feel as ethical industries. Obviously education, teaching, learning, healthcare. We feel that we can really contribute to these industries by creating exciting platforms, easy to use platforms, secure platforms that people can utilise. What we feel is one of the most important things for Scotland to boost economic growth is investing in rural areas. By investing in broadband in these local areas, we can attract more talent, we can attract more companies, and we can drastically improve the delivery of education and learning within these schools, within disparate regions within Scotland.
We'll get started because we don't have a lot of time. Let me introduce myself. I'm Bronwyn Swinnerton and this is my colleague Taryn Coop, and we're from the University of Leeds. And today I'm going to tell you about our ESRC NRF project that looks at higher education in South Africa and in England. So as I said, it's funded by ESRC and NRF. So we have a Cape Town team who are funded by the National Research Foundation in Cape Town, and you can see the 5 members of the team there. We also have the Leeds University team, which is funded by the ESRC. So the project started in October 2016 and ends for the Leeds team in November 2018, so in a couple of months' time. Even though we've put in one application, we have 2 different funding bodies, and so the South Africa team have an extension on theirs until March, so we are going to carry on working together after we formally end in November. Today we're going to give you a background to the project and a little bit of the context, and then my colleague Taryn is going to show you some of the maps, the interactive maps that we've created. So the project focuses on marketisation, digital technology and unbundling, and we're particularly interested in the role of the market in higher education and how private providers are coming into the market of higher education using digital technology to unbundle some provision. And don't worry about unbundling, I'll explain what we mean by that in a moment. So if we look at marketisation, and the growth in demand for higher education has grown rapidly since the Second World War, and especially so in the last 30 years. And this, along with the financial crisis of 2008, has put a huge financial strain on universities. And so they're looking for different ways to bring in revenue. And one of those ways, obviously, is fees. And fees have increased to over £9,000 in the UK. And in South Africa, they've increased 9% per year in the period 2010 to 2017. At the same time, universities are becoming increasingly accountable, and rankings are very important. Things like REF and TEF are used to judge institutions. And at the same time, private companies are increasingly coming into the higher education landscape. So digital technology. We know that digital technology is ubiquitous in society and in education, and especially in higher education. And there's a growth of online and blended courses. The EdTech industry is estimated to be worth over $120 billion, and it is expected to double in the next 10 years. And many of the reasons, there are many reasons for bringing technology into education. It's to widen access, it's to allow people who can't ordinarily come to a campus-based university to be able to do distance courses, people who work or people who've got caring responsibilities. And then we've seen one of the ways in which digital technology has really increased provision is through MOOCs. MOOCs have rapidly expanded in the last 10 years with global platforms such as Coursera, FutureLearn and edX. But is digital technology really widening access? Because when MOOCs first came out, they were free, open access. You didn't really pay for anything except for certification, whereas now they're increasingly monetized. You pay for credit, and now on FutureLearn platforms you pay for access for more than a few weeks after the course has ended. And you also, in order to be able to access such courses, you need a device, you need data or Wi-Fi, you need to have a certain level of digital skills and literacy, and that's not always the case, especially in South Africa. And so the third part of our project is looking at unbundling and how marketisation and digital technology has led to unbundling. And the term unbundling first arose in the computer industry, when IBM started to unbundle its software from its hardware. And so instead of buying a computer with all the software already loaded, you then could buy each separately, so the software was unbundled from that package. And for us, unbundling is the process of disaggregating educational provision into its component parts, likely for delivery by multiple stakeholders, often using digital approaches, and which can result in rebundling. And an example of unbundled educational provision could be a degree programme offered as individual standalone modules available for credit via an online platform to be studied at the learner's pace in any order on a paper module model with academic content, tutoring and support being offered by the awarding university, other universities and a private company. When Taryn shows you the maps in a few minutes, you will see some examples of unbundled provision in the UK. So the key questions for our project have been, well, where does the discourse of unbundling come from? And how is it used by the research literature, the policy literature, the media, and the interviewees? How do different stakeholders in higher education understand unbundling and rebundling? How is unbundling happening in practice in South Africa and in England, and that's what we'll be focusing on today. How does the intersection of unbundling, marketisation and digital technology change the pedagogies available in the higher education system? Which aspects of pedagogy and provision can be or are being unbundled and are marketised? And what is the nature of educational provision currently available in the UK and the South African higher education at the intersection of those three aspects? So in order to answer these questions, we carried out a range of different data collection with a range of stakeholders. So we carried out interviews with policymakers, EdTech developers, higher education leaders and private company CEOs. We also held focus group with academics, those people who are using those provisions for teaching and learning every day. And then we carried out surveys with students to find out whether students were aware of this provision and what they thought of the potential use of it in the future. We also use desk research to look at the relationship between universities and private companies, and that's where the data from that is used to make maps, and that is what Taryn's now going to talk about.
So part of our project involved creating maps to present the partnering of private companies with public universities to offer online education, unbundled, rebundled, or online programs. And this just gives a bit about the theoretical underpinning of this. Social cartography specifically involves the mapping of ideologies, but it's the premises of social cartography that provide a rationale for visualization techniques in this case. So for insight into relational trends across a context, and for large amounts of data to be explored simultaneously. So what has become recognized as a subset of social cartography is tactical cartography, which involves creating interactive maps, usually using digital tools or digital software. So our tactic or strategy involved designing the maps using our theoretical framework that Bronwyn briefly explored to inform the scope, visual features, and clustering options in order to reveal patterns for analysis. So, for example, Bronwyn spoke about marketization, so in the theory around market making in the higher education sector, there's exploration of the dynamics of ranking and brands of institutions, and this is visually represented on our maps by including data from the Times Higher Education ranks, the historical status of the institutions, and university membership groups. So just a little bit of the literature, the connections between public higher education and the corporate sector for research, employment, outsourcing, services offered in partnership, and various other models of academy-industry relationships are well documented. And in 2001, Anderson suggested that more expansive views of these connections be captured, particularly through visualization techniques and using social network theories. And a number of authors have contributed to this space, as well as a number of blog posts that have specifically spoken about online program management providers in the landscape, what business models they use, and what type of certificates or degree they're providing. So the maps were made at the beginning of this year and then updated last month. And everything on the maps was sourced from the public domain, from distance education websites, the university websites, the partnering private company websites, and press releases in the media. The basic elements that you'll see on the maps are circles and squares and arrows. And the circles represent the universities, squares represent the private companies, which I will refer to as OPMs. And OPM stands for Online Program Management, I'm sure you know, providers. For example, companies like Pearson, 2U, Academic Partnerships, who provide a variety of services to do with managing online programs, such as market research, enrollment management, student retention, and sometimes technical support. And MOOC providers offer a digital platform to host university content, but some MOOC providers are also diversifying their services to become more like OPMs. So this discourse is debated, but for the purpose of this presentation, I'm going to use the umbrella term OPMs to refer to these private companies, bearing in mind that the services range from a digital platform to different managerial services. Okay, so we have used shapes, sizes, colors, borders, and clusters to represent different features or characteristics of the institutions and companies in the terrain. And we've done it all on an open source platform called Kumu, which is a data visualization specifically for relationship data. So I'm going to show you one or two of the South African maps. They're static images from the interactive platform. And from there, we'll move on to the UK mapping, which is more the focus of this session. And I'll show you that on the interactive platform. And just so you know, the maps and the underlying data will be made available at the end of our project. Okay. So this is a mapping of the relationship as you can see, between the public universities and private companies, OPMs, in the South African space. So the circles represent the universities. They are scaled according to the number of students enrolled in each institution. The borders around them represent the historical status of each institution. And this system of differentiation is quite debated and criticized for embedding historical disparities from the apartheid era in South Africa into today's discourse. But it is still used in policy documents, especially around funding models. So the dark borders represent the historically advantaged institutions that were privileged during the apartheid era. The thin light borders represent the historically advantaged institutions with historically disadvantaged sites that came about as a result of mergers after apartheid. And the thicker light grey borders are the historically disadvantaged institutions, mainly located in poor rural areas. And institutions without borders are new in the terrain. So the connections between squares, which are the OPMs, and circles are also color-coded according to what type of teaching and learning is provided through that partnership. So what we see here is the pattern shows that the OPMs work predominantly with a specific type of institution, research-intensive, historically advantaged institutions. The two exceptions are comprehensive or more teaching-focused institution and a research-intensive institution that are both historically advantaged institutions with historically disadvantaged sites. This distinction becomes clearer when we look at which research-intensive institutions do not have any partnerships, and they are all predominantly historically disadvantaged institutions. So this is the same elements on the map, just clustered in a different way. This is clustered according to the Times Higher Education rank, world rankings, and the 3 highest ranked universities in South Africa, there are only 3 in the top 400 in the world, are collectively partnered with all 9 of the private companies currently active in the terrain. So now I'm going to move on to the interactive platform. So this is the UK terrain, and you can see it's a lot busier, a lot more universities in the UK. So we have 166 UK public universities represented by the circles, colour-coded according to membership groups. Russell Group, Guild HE, Million Plus, the former 94 Group, which disbanded in 2013, University Alliance, and those that are non-aligned with any specific membership group. They're also scaled according to the size, according to the number of students enrolled at each institution. And there are 21 OPMs active in the terrain, and they're represented by the squares, color-coded according to which country in which they're established, and scaled according to the number of employees as a proxy for size of the company. So I'll take you through a few points of interest that sparked discussion for our research team. So if we use the interactive techniques to highlight the Russell Group universities, almost all the Russell Group universities, that's 22 out of 24 of them, partner with at least one OPM to offer either MOOCs or online programs. And that's specifically what we're looking at in these connections, MOOCs and online programs. So not looking at short online courses in this map. Also, almost all former 1994 group universities, 12 of 14, partner with one or more OPM. And then when we go to those that are not aligned with any brand or membership group, less than a third of those universities partner with an OPM. So we see a pattern around the university's external brands and partnering with OPMs that are active in the terrain. Another option for clustering is the Times Higher Education World Rank, same as in the South African maps. And again, if we look at those that are not ranked, the majority of them also do not partner. There are some that do partner, but the majority do not. And same in the lower ranked universities. There are partnerships there, but it's not as dense as when we go to those in the top 300 in the world, which are, it's dominated by the Russell Group and the former 94. And that's where we see most of the partnering happening in the terrain. So next we're going to have a look at individual institutions as examples of how this trend is unfolding, and we'll also look at how we can use the interactive tools to sort of unpack the underlying features of each institution. So first, we have King's College, and they are typical of the pattern we've seen emerge. They are a Russell Group university. They are ranked in the top 100, 36th in the world. They partner with 3 companies, 2 to provide online programs and 1 to provide MOOCs. And we have included the number of MOOCs and online programs that they are currently actively providing. So this is typical of what we see, the trend we see in the terrain. Okay. The next example is an institution that is atypical of the trends we're seeing. The University of Cambridge doesn't partner with any OPMs. It is also a Russell Group university. It is ranked in the top 100, second in the world, and it does not offer any MOOCs or any full online programs, degrees. And, oh, it's getting stuck. Oh, there we go. Okay. And this could be for a number of reasons. We've discussed perhaps the high status, the high demand is already there. They don't want to dilute the brand. Perhaps their teaching model is more small seminars, but maybe that's something some of you will have ideas about afterwards, why perhaps this is why the University of Cambridge isn't partnering, not going with the trend of other Russell Group universities. Our next example, again, fits with the trend, the University of Lincoln. It is not aligned with any membership group. It is ranked quite low, between 600 and 800 in the world rankings. It does not offer any MOOCs. It does offer a couple of honours degrees online, top-up degrees, but not through any partnerships with OPMs. And our final example is another exception to the trend, and that's Coventry University. And Coventry is part of University Alliance, which is a membership group which represents institutions that specialize in technical and professional education. Coventry, oh, hold on a sec. Coventry is not in the top universities ranked in the world. It's between 601 and 800, according to the Times Higher Education rank. But we see that it partners with FutureLearn, and you can see by the color of the arrow, it partners with FutureLearn to provide MOOCs and online programs, full online degrees. And Coventry at the moment is the only UK university providing those full online degrees with FutureLearn at the moment. This is a snapshot from last month. So, and the other universities partnering with FutureLearn for that are Australian universities. So Coventry has been quite active in terms of teaching and learning, unbundling teaching and learning provision in the UK. So they offer fully online programs with FutureLearn that can be taken module by module on a pay-as-you-go basis. And you have the option to take the MOOCs on FutureLearn and use those MOOC credits towards a full degree. So as we have showed you at the beginning, our desk research was only one phase of data collection, and we have used the maps to contextualize some of the evidence that we've collected through our other data collection phases, through the interviews, focus groups, and surveys. But what we've hoped to illustrate in this very short time is how we've used the interactive mapping techniques to gain this panoramic view in two places, two national spaces, and how we've weaved our conceptual framework of unbundling marketization and digital technology into a visualization through the visualization features and interactive clustering tools. Thank you.
Thank you. So we've got a few minutes for questions. I've noticed the question of why are they moving around? People want to know why the map moves.
Okay. So this also has the social network analysis capabilities. And what that does is try to find like points of power. So it will try and sort of jiggle them around and show you where a point of power is. Now, we're not really looking at those measures in this project, but the reason it sort of jiggles according to, like close to FutureLearn is because FutureLearn partners with almost 40 institutions. So that's a point of sort of power, so it jiggles around that point of power. It's sort of like it's called gravity on the software, and you can change the amount of gravity, but yeah, that's what makes it jiggle. But it's just also fun. Yes?
Did you guys base your analysis, like the structure of the analysis, around the software, or did you find the software after you already knew how you wanted to do it?
We knew we wanted to, like I had said, weave our conceptual framework into these maps. And a lot of social network analysis mapping software is for very big data sets, so that you kind of just see these little nodes and lines and that kind of thing. And our data sets weren't that big. We wanted to see individual things. So what was important when choosing the software was the decorative features, so that we could use color and borders and that kind of thing. So that's why we chose Kumu, because although it does have the social network analysis capabilities, you can run the metrics on it. It was a good option in terms of, for a small data set, having those very strong decorative features.
And I'd just like to add to that when we carried out the interviews, that was where we came across CEOs of private companies saying, we want to partner with the top 200 universities in the world. And so that's where we started looking at ranking and types of university. So it was something that had come out of the earlier data collection that meant that was the focus of how to put the variables into the mapping.
Is this on? Yeah. Interested to get your, I appreciate it's not the kind of focus of your research, but to get your insight into whether you think this is a trend in terms of partnering with commercial organisations, which is still growing, and kind of where it is. Is it something which you perceive that is mature, or is it immature? And do you know, if you did this in 5 years' time, would you expect to see all of those unaligned institutions finding a commercial partner?
I think it's certainly immature, and we know that from the earlier maps, that when we created the mapping at the beginning of the year, it's changed already. So, for example, in the South African mapping, the University of Cape Town had no distance students, but they were creating provision that you thought might be for distance students, and now they've got some distance students. But in terms of leaving those non-aligned universities behind, I think that's a real risk. I think that yes, this will mature, and in 5 years' time the landscape might look very different. But to what extent that will bring in all the universities, I don't know. This could really leave some universities behind.
Thank you.
I wonder, in your interviews, especially with those universities that perhaps didn't fall into the higher rankings, whether there was a desire by those institutions to engage in partnering, and if they actually saw any particular barriers to that, or whether they were comfortable, in inverted commas, to stay where they were and not partner and just plough their own furrow.
What we actually found from the interviews was that the more high-ranking universities were almost saying, we're fed up of people knocking on the door, we're fed up of getting emails, we're fed up of people ringing us up. But then you would get the much lower ranked universities saying nobody wants to partner with us, we would love to develop this sort of provision. And we were at an event yesterday where somebody said this sort of provision needs a disproportionate amount of funding at the beginning, and the lower ranked universities just don't have that amount of money. So if a private company doesn't come and help them do this, they can't do it. And so I'm not saying every university wants to do it, but there are certainly universities that are not being approached that would like to start developing this sort of provision. I'm just going to answer that. If you had to pick just one, what is the most important conclusion from this work? I think we're still working on that, but I think it's that private providers are really keen to work with universities that enhance their brand, that they don't just get the business, they get the association with the high-ranking universities.
I saw another question which is easy, that's what I'll take. The software is called Kumu, K-U-M-U.
So I'll just do one more question before we finish. Another variable which would be interesting is the size of the EdTech team at those institutions to see if that has an impact. That's interesting because at another presentation somebody said, well, why aren't institutions putting EdTech teams together to do this themselves? And I think that means you've got to have the resource to do that. You've got to have the skills within people who already work at that institution or be able to set up a team. And when the Digital Education Service at Leeds started, they had 3 or 4, and now they're into 40, 50, 60, because the universities decided to allocate resources to that. And I think it would be really interesting to look at that, and we are really interested in other people's views of what variables we haven't captured on these maps. So I think, yes, I think you would find that the higher ranked universities with more money would have bigger EdTech teams.
And that has come up in discussion in our interviews, the sort of dilemma of build or buy, and whether that is possible or not, or to purchase or partner, and arrange between that spectrum of purchasing and partnering, building or buying.
Okay, thank you. We'll leave it there, and we are around all afternoon if anybody wants to come talk to us.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, this is where the tech is seamless, fantastic. So I'm going to talk for about 20, 25 minutes about a project that we've been running at Manchester Metropolitan University in collaboration with the local secondary school, which kind of picks up on some of the theoretical things that I've been thinking about recently around failure and why it is that we don't really let our students fail. So this came about kind of from 3 different areas and 3 different interests of mine. So as I said, I've been very interested in this kind of theoretical idea of learning through failure. And I see this very much in our own students and my own time at university. So I do remember when I was a student that actually failing and being kicked out of your year was an absolute option. Now I've never seen a student in any of the institutions I've worked at fail for plagiarising, for anything. It's not something that I think we really, is really something that students think about. I also think that failure is really, really important. So for me, when I regularly fail to get papers accepted, to get funding proposals accepted, I see those as learning experiences. And I kind of worry that we're not really giving students that kind of opportunity to accept and laud positive failure. So one of the things that I've been thinking about is, in terms of my work around games and play, is a construct called the Magic Circle. And the idea of the Magic Circle is that it's a safe space in which you can fail. Now, video games use this all the time. People play video games because failure is intrinsic in them. If you could play a video game and we're going to get it right first time, it would be really boring. It's that cycle of failure, reconstruction, learning through failure that's really important in terms of video games. So I've been thinking for a while about how you could take this kind of learning through failure model and apply it ethically and safely within higher education. A recent other interest of mine is escape rooms. So can I just get a show of hands of how many people have played an escape room here? So about half, and how many people know what an escape room is? So, okay, so who doesn't know what an escape room is? Okay, so the idea is, and this, I've seen looks on people's faces of absolute horror, is in an escape room, you and a number of other people, usually 2, 3 or 4, are locked in a room, often not really physically locked in, and you have to solve a series of puzzles over the course of an hour or so to get out of the room. And I first played this with a bunch of learning technologists down in London about 4 years ago, and all 4 of us came out going, wow, that's absolute, there's something about the time and the physicality and the being locked in a room and having to work with other people and having to collaborate. It was really powerful. And over the last 4 years, there's some really interesting work that's been done around using escape rooms for education. Andrew Walsh at the University of Huddersfield has done some amazing stuff around escape rooms for libraries. Helen Whitehead has done some sort of online escape room work. Liz Cable at Leeds Trinity is an absolute master of the field in terms of getting, she has boxes and boxes of this kind of escape boxes that I know she carries around in her car, and the students absolutely engage with that. And Samantha Clark, particularly at the University of Coventry, is doing some really good theoretical thinking around what might escape rooms for learning look like. And that was the kind of original space that I was thinking in, but we worked from 2012 to 2014, I was involved in a project called Magical, which was looking at how we could get children in years 7, 8 and 9 in high school to engage in collaborative learning through digital game making. And this really opened my eyes to the kind of power of collaboration, and in terms of skills such as problem solving, collaborative learning, teamwork, creativity, and just kind of lateral thinking and thinking outside the box. Now, whilst the outcomes of that project were generally positive, one of the big issues that we had was around the technical provider, the ability to have game-making software, the ability then to take that software and use it on different machines. It was basically a lot of technical issues. And for me, that's when it all came together, of thinking about what can we do to learn through failure, how could I do something cool with escape rooms, and how could we build on the principles of learning through game making that we developed in this previous project. And it came from a chance conversation with one of our ex-students who happens to be a senior maths teacher at a local school, and me saying, I'd really like to do something with escape rooms and failure, and him saying, well, I've got a bunch of really good sixth formers, and they're doing an enrichment project, they've got an enrichment week, and we don't know what to do with them. So I forgot to use my slides. That's excellent. I've just got 2 embedded in talking that I forgot to actually use my slides. So that's my slide. That's just the point I'm just making about failure. So I will move on from that. So this was talking about the Magical project. So this is when the Eduscapes project was born. And we've actually run it for 3 years in collaboration with a high school in Cheadlehume, which is just about 5 miles south of Manchester. In the second year, we got some funding, some Erasmus Plus network funding from a consortium called Learning Games, which is really nice because that's given us the opportunity to take some ideas and build on them with international partners. The big problem with it has been fitting it into curriculum. Despite having a senior person in the university who's totally committed to the project, because it's with students who are halfway, it's their AS level year, the curriculum by that point is so full that there's very limited spaces in terms of being able to fit in something that's cross-curricular and something that teaches these kind of failure-based skills. So in the first year, we had 12 students who were pretty much cherry-picked because it was a bit of an experiment, and they developed escape rooms during the 2-week enrichment period. In year 2, based on feedback from the first time, we used a smaller 1-week enrichment period. And it worked both times. And we got a lot of very good feedback, but the issue for me was that it was very much the best students, the brightest and the best. We had a small cohort, we had thrown a lot of resource into it, and I was very interested to see whether it was something that could be expanded beyond kind of the best 12 in the school. So based on our funding for the Learning Games project, we decided in the final year that we would go for a different model. So instead of having it pushed into an enrichment period, we'd run it as an optional work experience type activity, 1 hour a week over 6 months, and we'd open it up to 40 students. So we'd have a much different student demographic and see if we could, which was much more representative of the types of ideas we were looking at. I mean, it's all very well to have a model that works very well, but if it's not inclusive, there's not a great deal of point. And what I wanted to talk to today is kind of the ideas and models that came from that and some of the findings of the research that we've done. So this is the sort of model of failure-based learning that it was built around, with 3 key areas. First being initiation, development, and then presentation. And the idea of this, in the initiation period, it's about introducing students to the escape rooms and about giving them the opportunity to build up their teams. So we take them to a commercial escape room and play games with them. So the teams that are going to work together actually go and work through an escape room. We've then developed a kind of training program, which starts with looking at how you design puzzles, the different types of puzzles you might use, and looking at how you then would go through the steps to put an escape room together. In the first 2 years, we ran this as a single day. In the last year, we ran this over the course of the first month of the project and getting people together. And that's very much about taking time to team build, to scene set, and to make sure that students know what they're aiming at. Then we have this kind of failure-based development phase, and the whole point of getting out of an escape room is that you're designing something for other people, and you're never going to get it right first time, and that's absolutely fine. That's part of it, an accepted part of the process. That you will have to test it, and you'll have to test it over and over again, and that seeing how other people interact with your puzzles and with your theme is part of the learning experience. So this cycle of test it, fail it, reflect, revise is absolutely integral. And one of the things we say to students is that there will be different phases of it. So generally we'll say, come up with your theme and then come up with your puzzles. Test all of your puzzles and test them again. Watch other people doing it. Get other people to think aloud while they're working through it. Because what we've found is that teams will come up with something they think is really obvious and people solve it, just don't get it, or something that they think is really difficult that people solve straight away. So it's, that sort of process is absolutely crucial. So they will test it with the teachers, they'll test it with their other students and other groups, and then a couple of times during the period we'll send in people from the university. So again, I've sort of brought in friends who are game developers or professionals, and it's that kind of bringing a professional in and giving them the sort of professional feedback that's been quite key to it. And then finally, there's an event. Now, we run the Playful Learning Conference, which runs every year in July, and for the last 3 years we've brought these students in, given them conference passes. They've been part of the conference, but also they've been running the escape rooms for the delegates at the end of the conference, and this has been the really key moment for them. At the end of last year we had students going, I didn't realise it was a real thing, and suddenly they'd stepped up because they'd had this new level of professionalism because there was this professional presentation at the end. So while it's absolutely key to this that there isn't kind of an assessment, this presentation is the point at which actually you've done all your failing and then you've got a big public celebration at the end, and that's been very important for the students. Now, one of the reasons for kind of going into the physical escape rooms is to get away from the problems that we'd had when we were game building with digital games. But actually, there are lots and lots of ways that you can build technology into this, and it's been quite eye-opening the way that the students have kind of taken this and run with it themselves. So one of the things was using digital puzzles, so using various types of electronics. So there have been puzzles that have been around unlocking iPads, finding codes. One of the groups in the first year built this amazing electronic box with internal circuitry that you had to plug in 3 various things at different points and it would open the box. I think it allows for lots of creativity in terms of digital as well as physical and mechanical puzzles. I was quite surprised in how many of the groups got really creative in terms of scene setting. So they put their theme. We had one group that had ambient music running at different points along with different puzzles. Lots of groups went to a lot of trouble producing videos that would allow people to come to do the scene setting for them. So there's a lot of creativity there. One thing that we ask groups to do when people are in the room, there has to be a way of monitoring them. So we've got groups who've set up GoPros, who've set up various camera solutions, and ways of getting information. So some have used different types of computers or laptops and tablets and ways of digital ways of getting information to participants. On the other example, we've had some groups that have had a physical person in the room and use that as a way. So it allows you to be as digital as you want. Equally, you can go completely analog. And we've also been quite impressed with the kind of project management tools and different digital tools that students have used in terms of being able to design their room, being able to test their room, being able to monitor and reset their rooms really quickly. A lot of them have done that digitally. So what I like about this is you could do the whole thing without engaging in digital at all. You could make it a very, very high-tech digital room, but it allows groups to engage in the digital as much or as little as they want to. So for this final year, we ran some more structured research around the project. So this kind of had 3 questions and 3 different types of data that we were looking at. So we were interested in student learning, and we hypothesized that student learning would be around team building, that it would be, sorry, was that a time thing? There'd be around collaboration, that it would be around creativity and problem solving. So we used a post and pre-evaluation. Now, obviously, we didn't have a control group, so the significance that we could get from this was fairly limited anyway, but I was interested in whether things around their confidence in these areas were going to change. As it happened, what we learnt from this is that students won't fill out a post questionnaire once they've left the project, and so we've got very limited data on that, but there's some quite interesting qualitative stuff coming out of that too. In terms of trying to work out what the student experienced, did they like it, what did they feel that they got out of it, we've got quite a lot of rich qualitative data. So we got an RA to come in and interview all of the student groups over the one day of the conference that they came to run their rooms at, and that's kind of the analysis that I'm going to talk about here. We're also interested in the staff experience, so we do have some qualitative data from the 3 staff members that run the project as well, and that's backing up some of the data that I'm going to share with you. So we're at the point now of having the interview transcripts and having some of the qualitative data from the pre and a few post questionnaires. And we plan to do a detailed both thematic and discourse analysis on it. At the moment, we've done a very early kind of thematic analysis, just to see what the main things that come out, and I'm going to share that with you now. So in terms of the key findings, something that came out this year, which didn't really happen in previous years, and which I think is to do with the size of the cohort, is that the whole process of managing failure is not easy. So despite the fact that it was always, we were very clear with students all the way along that you will not get this right first time, you have to accept critical feedback, this is part of the process, it's about change and iteration and refinement. We still, on the first time that myself and colleagues went in to give students feedback, we got quite a lot of feedback from staff that the students had found it quite demotivating because we'd been critical but positive, and that they hadn't been used to receiving that kind of feedback. Now, whether that's something to do with we weren't horrible to them, but we were very constructive in terms of this bit isn't really going to work, you're going to need to look at that again. So I think they hadn't quite been expecting that this time, whereas in previous years, they were getting much more close engagement with members of staff because it was over a shorter period of time. So we're really thinking about how we set students up to accept that failure is part of the process and to manage it and to deal with it constructively, and that perhaps we need to put more support in around doing that. And more preparation for students in terms of this is how you accept, how you learn from the feedback that you're being given. That the structure is crucial, so coming back very strongly that the time spent in scene setting and doing initial training and support and playing was really key. Equally, the students really, really valued the fact that they could come to a public conference at the end and that they were engaging with the general public. And what they said at the end was, actually, we want to go back and do this again. Can we go and do it to the governors, and we want our parents to come in and do it. It was this sort of feeling of celebration for them came through very strongly. But also the idea of this iterative stage. And if anything, what we didn't do was perhaps chunk it up more in terms of development, because realistically they were having to have it tested 10 times to get something good, and I don't think they had the feel for exactly how much of this iteration was going to have to happen. So in terms of future work, that's something we'll definitely be looking at, and the middle section needs to be much more structured. In terms of the learning outcomes, well, we didn't gather any evidence on things that we did expect. There were some interesting things that came out that we hadn't expected. One was very much around the kind of power relationship between the students and their teachers. Because they'd got their teachers to play the games, this had opened up this new avenue of oh, my teacher is doing something that I've made that they can't solve. And it really, I think, in terms of building the students' confidence and their ideas of what they could do, it was absolutely amazing. This came up from lots and lots of the students. This feeling of independence as well. Now this, I think, we didn't have any evidence of this in the first 2 years, but I think this was in the third year, because it was run over such a long period of time, that they liked being trusted, that they really felt that they'd gone off and done a thing. And I think also this idea of they really got that other people don't think like them. And I'm not sure that there'd ever be a chance to sort of see that as obviously as when you're watching somebody try and solve the thing that you've produced. And several of them I was talking to were saying, I just never thought that anyone would think like that. And it's really opened my eyes to people are different. And if I'm producing a thing, there's lots of different takes on it. So I think in terms of those learning outcomes, were quite interesting that were coming out from it. So where's the project going now? We've got 3 universities in the UK who are taking it and going to be using it with their students, which is great. I'm really interested, if anybody else wants to take the model, we have a website, everything's available online. I'd be really interested if anybody else wants to take it and run with it with their students. We've received some funding from Erasmus+, so we're going to be running a 2-year project, which will be taking it into schools in 6 countries to try and sort of embed it. My issue with it is I think it's got a lot of potential, but it works much better with small groups and high input, whereas I think once, to make it valuable, it needs to be much more accessible to larger groups, and how you can then put that into different curricula. So we're looking at 6 different curricula, 6 different countries to see how we can push it forward. So thank you very much for listening. Please contact me if you'd like to know anything about the project. My email's there, and that's the project website. Does anybody have any questions? Are they constructing escape rooms to explore a certain topic? When they started in the first year, the colleague that I was working with was a maths teacher, and I'm a computer scientist, so we were interested in maths and computer science. But it turned out that that was kind of adding another layer of complexity, that the students were finding it quite hard sometimes to come up with puzzles anyway, and that making them all maths and computer science based wasn't a massive problem, but it just ended up that some of them were incredibly complex and required certain prior knowledge, which is kind of against the ethos of an escape room. So in the subsequent years, we didn't have any sort of curricula in terms of what the puzzles were about, because it was very much about cross-curricular objectives. Next one.
I have a question here too.
Yeah.
I know.
Hi.
So there's a couple of questions on the screen which kind of relate to what I wanted to ask too about being a gamer myself. I get very motivated by the random badges that show up on my PS4, which I wasn't necessarily working towards, but show up and kind of motivate me to do new things and find new things in the game. I just wondered, given that I see badges everywhere, whether you could potentially use badges here, not only for motivation in kind of self-assessment, but also in terms of showing the things that the kids, young people have learned through failure at a distance outside of the project.
Yeah. I think that hadn't occurred to me, but now you've said it, it's ringing lots of bells. I think part of it was, why would the students do it? And we'd always said, well, it's something to tell UCAS about, and that we'll give you a letter. But actually, they've never come back and asked for that. I think by the end of it, they've retrospectively kind of enjoyed the experience. I think this year, because it took so long, because they were only doing it for an hour a week, there were certain points when it kind of lost its impetus and the staff had to get back in there. Now I can then see, actually, if we are putting more of a structure in, and we did that around badges, that each group has to collect certain badges at certain times, that would not only allow you to structure it, but it would allow you to see where you were in comparison to the other groups. And I think because there were more groups this time, the first 2 years, they were all working in the same spaces, and there was a lot of competition between the groups. We actually ran it as a competition and gave prizes. We didn't do for various logistic reasons in the final year. But actually, I think being able to see that group's done 10 iterations, or that group's failed, 20 times, could actually be really motivating. I might come talk to you about that. Are there any other questions in the room? Time. I'll just pick up one more. If University Education was a board game, would it be at £27,000? Piece puzzle, Trivial Pursuit, or the beginning of a very long game of Monopoly, or a bit of each, maybe. Okay, I can't see the time, but I suspect it's moving onwards and everybody's wanting a bit of lunch. So I'm going to stop here. Thank you for listening. I'm around for the whole conference and very happy to talk to anyone. Please get in touch. Thank you.
I'm John Wilson, I'm the CEO at Agenta. We're a technology company that focuses on education and learning. We build, manage and operate platforms for education, for video collaboration. Externally, we prefer to work with what we feel as ethical industries. Obviously education, teaching, learning, healthcare. We feel that we can really contribute to these industries by creating exciting platforms, easy to use platforms, secure platforms that people can utilise. What we feel is one of the most important things for Scotland to boost economic growth is investing in rural areas. By investing in broadband in these local areas, we can attract more talent, we can attract more companies, and we can drastically improve the delivery of education and learning within these schools, within disparate regions within Scotland.